Hello, everyone, and welcome to Hit and Hustle from IrisSportsDaily.com. I am your host, Greg Flamong, and with me, as always, is Mr. Jamie Ueyama, Mr. Jamie University. It is Thursday, July 6th. Hope everyone had a great 4th of July. We took that day off. I think partly because of the holiday, and also I think everyone needed some time to cool off a little bit, given the news over the weekend about Justin Scott committing to Ohio State and Isaiah Canion leaving the Notre Dame class and going over to Georgia Tech. So we're going to talk about those things today. It's pretty much the one topic that's on the mind of every Notre Dame fan at the moment so far. So look, we're gonna have a discussion about Notre Dame defensive recruiting, recruiting in general, and kind of what's going on. I think we're gonna cool the temperature a little bit. I think people need to settle down a bit with the rhetoric. But I think there are some real concerns there too. So it's not like everything's fine. It's just I think people are going a little bit overboard, but that kind of makes sense given it's the off season and that sort of thing. And so any little news is going to take on greater significance. First of all, Jamie, how was your 4th of July?
Well, I'm in Canada, so it was Tuesday. So,
listen, you should be happy for us. It should be a happy day for Canadians as well.
I don't know if you know your American history, but did you know that America tried to invade Canada in 1812? Didn't go good. America took the L.
Why are you bringing up old stuff?
I'm just telling you, whatever. It's not like, I mean, I love America. I love my American friends that I work with, but we don't need to celebrate July 4th. They did try to actually invade Canada at one time.
It's too much snow. It's too much snow, Jamie. It's too cold up there, so we can't. The Americans can't be dealing with that stuff. So fine. I had a great 4th of July. Thank you very much. I was in the pool with my children. We did barbecuing and all that stuff, and it was a great time. Don't love the fireworks. The kids are very concerned about it. It makes them nervous. Go figure. A bunch of loud booms that they don't understand. My oldest daughter is very afraid of fire, just generally speaking. Like she doesn't like fire. So it's tough. It's tough when there's.
Is this a hot take? I don't like fireworks. I think fireworks.
It's a little hot, I guess. I don't like them either. So I guess we're both kind of in that. Like I don't do it. Like it's illegal in Long Beach and it's fine with me. It's not fine for my brother-in-law who breaks that law every single year. But I mean, it's like Long Beach it's essentially like they say it's illegal, but it isn't. It really is not. Everyone's doing it. So, but I don't like fireworks. It makes a mess. They cause fires, like serious fires out here. Like you get one in a tree and it's like a real problem. It's not good. So,
I don't mind. Okay. Here's my one caveat with that. I like if you go to Disneyland and they have the fireworks at Disneyland, or you have like the 4th of July fireworks in Washington, D.C. They have a big celebration or whatever, that kind of thing. Like it's like an actual, like a big thing that's like professionally done. Cool. But Joe Blow, who's just like definitely not licensed to do this,
right,
who could cause a major, accident and hurt someone. No, I don't think those people. Why? That isn't your right, actually. Like you said, it's illegal in a lot of places. I'm not down with that. People don't need to do it. I enjoy the fireworks as you want in a big celebration, but it's just like one of these things. It's like just because you can buy it and like doesn't mean you should.
Well, something that people should buy is ESQ clothing. From Ga Wang, ESQclothing.com, our presenting sponsor of this show. And I think if you're going to spend hundreds of dollars on something, Jamie, you should spend it on something as quality as the ESQ shirts that Ga Wang is putting out there. We've talked about the bamboo shirts on our show for the past few months, and they're a great product. They won't blow your finger off. They won't do any of those things. You can wear them year round. It's not just a one-day thing where people are spending hundreds and hundreds of dollars on these illegal fireworks, Jamie. Why do that? Instead, you should upgrade your shirt game with Godwing's bamboo dress shirt. Comfortable, fits great, airy, has stretch, machine washable, wrinkle resistant, odor resistant. It's a great product. Everyone should spend their money on that. Don't spend your money on illegal fireworks. That's not good. It hurts people, Jamie. It puts too much of a burden on our firefighters out there, our heroes who come to put out the fires from your terrible illegal fireworks. So head over to esqclothing.com and upgrade your shirt game, Jamie.
Like Sander said too, it's not great for dogs. Not a great thing for dogs.
And you know what? As people love to talk about the troops. We support the troops. Troops coming back from literal war zones. They don't need that stuff.
They don't need that stuff. Explosives going off near them. Yeah.
They don't need that stuff. It's not good for a lot of people who aren't used. So just think about that next time. Okay, Jamie, let's get into it. It admittedly, sometimes you get news and you think, oh man, this is not going to go over very well. Learned about Isaiah Canion. I can't even remember what day it was. Matt told us like an hour before. It's like, hey, this is a thing that's going to happen, and it did. And then that was followed by Justin Scott, just kind of out of the blue, committing to Ohio State. And it was surprising. And I think that, there was a lot of talk about how could, he's been trending away for a long time. And first of all, I don't think either of us ever felt good about him for a long time. And we've said that.
I don't think any Notre Dame fan felt good about him.
The vibes were definitely low. That's for sure. So it's not when he committed, it's very unsurprising that he committed to somewhere else. I was very surprised that he actually went ahead and did it when he did. I thought there would be I thought there would be like a show, like KVA, like he made his announcement, like he's announced that he's going to make a commitment a couple weeks from now. That's kind of where I thought it would be. But that's not what he did. He pulled the trigger very soon after his visit to Ohio State. And I think that is, it kind of makes sense in that it was the last visit. And he said, basically after every visit he went on, that was the leader, right? So Georgia, yes. He wanted to commit to Georgia.
Any visit he took.
Visit he took, like literally, he went to Michigan. And I told my family, Michigan's where I'm going. Went to Ohio State, wanted to go to Ohio State, and they were able to tell him, like, hey, you're done with your visits. You want to go here? Let's commit. And then he did, right? And so, a lot of people talking about, oh, Notre Dame finished 4th or whatever. To me, that's simply a product of he was on Notre Dame first. And then everyone else got a bunch of visits. And so then
who cares where you finish unless it's
exactly.
First.
Like it doesn't matter. It really doesn't. And
it's actually worse to finish second.
And another part is people like, oh, Mike Elson did such a great job. It's like, really? Did he? Did he get
closed
him?
That really well.
Did he get him? He didn't get him. And not just that, Michigan wasn't a factor all this time. So if he was doing such a great job, he would have been in it the whole time with them. So I think the way that it fell has really soured people on this. Why don't you just give me your thought, Jamie, and we'll kind of build from there. Like, give me your thought on this recruitment, on what this means, and all those kind of other things. Wherever you want to take it.
Okay, so first, I want to just mention this because I didn't. It's funny because there's always this there's this weird revisionist history with Mike Elson. And I do think Mike Elson is a good defensive line coach.
Yeah.
I've always felt that. I've always felt he was a good defensive line coach. I never had any doubt about that. But he's never been a good recruiter. And it's not just that Keith Gilmore basically landed all of those guys who kind of basically boosted the Notre Dame pass rush.
That 2016 class.
That 2016 class. But even if you think about like Kurt Heinisch was committed to Keith Gilmore and the Adam Ramones were committed to and then if you go back further, Lewis Nix was Tony Alford. Aaron Lynch was Tony Alford. Stephon Tuitt, Chuck Martin, Ishaq Williams, Bob Diaco. So who were the guys that, like, he didn't really land anybody. All of his best guys were guys that other people land, because it was different back then. Like over a decade ago, it wasn't about the position coach as much. It was more about the area recruiter, which is why Alford was like landing like defensive linemen in Florida, right?
Yeah.
That's what it was about more at that time. So I mean, if Justin Scott would have went to Michigan and played for Mike Elson, he would have had a good chance to be successful as he would have at any defensive line coach that he worked with. But I mean, he also wouldn't have chose there because of Mike Elson, because Mike Elson is not that guy as a recruiter. I think none of it matters with Scott in terms of where it was like everyone was kind of just waiting for that to happen. Like, it's funny. It's just like people come out and they're ready to like dunk on Notre Dame when that happens. Like I think it's a bit of a ridiculous thing to say, like, well, oh man, how can you lose a guy like this from Chicago? It's like, it doesn't matter where he's from. Like, he could have been from anywhere. It's like his personality and the way that his recruitment went had nothing to do with him being from Chicago. Like, it wasn't like that. And it's also like he didn't have this. I think people always assume, like, if you're from Chicago, you have this like immediate affinity like this for Notre Dame, and that doesn't always work that way. Right? It doesn't always work that way. Like, Cam Williams, who's not from Chicago, but he's from like a suburb, it's a Chicagoland area, I guess, right? Like, first of all, no one's being like, well, Cam Williams, like, I mean, he's pretty good and he's from that area, but like,
I am much more confident that Cam Williams will be good than Justin Scott is.
Yes,
and I'm just speaking about Cam Williams as a player.
Extremely more confident in him being more of an instant impact guy, and just he's a safer prospect, no doubt. I just think that it was just like people were just kind of waiting for it to happen, and then waiting to say like, oh, Notre Dame didn't close on him or whatever. And that's I whatever, they didn't close on him, but like I just don't know, like, even if he chose he chose Ohio State now. I don't know that he's going to end up at Ohio State.
Right.
I wouldn't feel confident if he chose Notre Dame, right? And I don't know. I don't think many people could say what drives him. So I don't know what like I don't know what they were supposed to kind of do there, right? That was going to change. Like, it's just not, there's nothing there that I think that it was like, man, Notre Dame really screwed this up or whatever. It's like, I mean, Georgia thought they were getting him at one point. Miami thought they were getting, like, that Miami thing was happening for a long time.
Yeah.
And then he started taking these officials and it was like, wow, Michigan's got all the momentum now. Right. And that probably came from Mike Elson, because he probably told Mike Elson that he was feeling good. Right. Because, when you're getting like Notre Dame reporters, well, who's telling them? Mike Elson is telling them, right? Like, so, and then Ohio State felt good and they closed, and good for them. Maybe they'll keep him, and maybe he has a chance to be like, really, really good there. Larry Johnson is obviously a very accomplished coach. Also, Larry Johnson, he's old. Like, he might not be there that whole time. I don't know. I just think it's like, it's a very much like, if Notre Dame landed him, it would be good for the perception of things and good for the hype, right? Which is, I mean, I think it is important. It's not nothing, right? But I also don't think it's like this guy is the 5-star to answer all of the 5-star problems for Notre Dame. I think there's other players that would have been way more impactful if they could land. And the big problem isn't that they didn't land Justin Scott. It's that they weren't in on anybody else who was ranked in that thing. They weren't in on anybody else who was ranked at that level. So then all of a sudden it's like, well, you got to land Justin Scott because he's the only guy who's like that, right? And that really is, and that's really the main problem with where they're at right now is that, because even if you look at the last class, well, they had Keon Keeley and then lost Keon Keeley, but it's like, well, they're still Peyton Bowen, right? And then they lost Peyton Bowen, and obviously those were big or whatever, but it's like they aren't in on any of these other guys who are like elite guys, and that's just the main problem is that they just so and that's why too. And then now it just all that pressure gets put on Kyngstonn Viliamu-Asa, right? Now that's where all of that happens now, and I don't know, like you hear stuff like it's trending towards Ohio State. It's like, well, until it happens or whatever, until I know for sure, then we'll see, right? Because I don't think that he's made his choice yet. Because if he made a choice, we'd hear it. We'd hear about it, right? So, and we'll see what happens. But that one, I think personally, would be a bigger blow for Notre Dame because I think he's someone who would probably play very early, play a lot, start for more years than probably Justin Scott would. And he's kind of the last guy left. So in terms of like, the perception things, that would hurt a lot if they don't end up getting him.
Yeah. I do want to address Tyler Hack a little bit about like rumors, and I'm just going to talk about the room. I'm not going to talk about whether or not the rumor is true because I don't think it really matters. Like people are talking about rumors about like Al Washington, like something he did, show him at his mom's work or whatever, or Al Golden, didn't visit Justin Scott or whatever. In my opinion, anytime there's you don't land a player, there's always going to be something, right? Like there's always something where it's like, oh, you called too many times, or you didn't did that. Like I remember like a couple years ago with a recruit and a coach that, Notre Dame, a coach that everybody liked, and a recruit that they needed, they didn't land. It's like I heard a story about how this coach had kind of blew it. Like he texted him at like a time he shouldn't have texted him, and it was like, oh, like he blew it. And it's like, there's always something. Like there's always something like that. Like these are months long relationships that these coaches have with the players. And if they do something at some point that the player doesn't like or the family member doesn't like, it's like I don't really think that that's what ultimately leads the player to go somewhere else. It's just like we never hear about the mistakes that are made when the player eventually ends up at Notre Dame. Because it just doesn't matter, right? Like it doesn't. Like there's always something that comes up. Like to me, the individual stories like that are kind of scapegoats. And
totally.
And to put it into like a football context, right? Like everyone talks about the double safety blitz against Ohio State, right? And it's like, look, that's one play. It was a costly play, but it's one play in a series, like a whole game. Like it's just like I think those things carry too much weight, and they become like the sounding boards for why someone is bad or why someone needs to be fired. Like I think that like maybe they're true, but we put too much weight on them in the general discussion. Yeah, it's too much. Now, but I do think it's fair. Oh, go ahead. You finish your thought.
I just want to interject this one thing because the perfect example of all of that is Bob Diaco. So the Bob Diaco, the infamous sleeping in his car,
slept outside Ishaq Williams.
If Ishaq Williams, if his parents didn't want him to go to Notre Dame or he didn't want to go to Notre Dame, he becomes an immediate creep. That becomes like worse than Jim Harbaugh sleeping over at somebody's house. Like that becomes like, what's wrong with Bob Diaco? What a weirdo.
Right.
And instead it becomes, man, look at how hard this and dedicated this guy is.
Really wanted him.
And it's just
or Notre Dame sending the truck to Demetrius Robertson's house.
Yeah. If it works, then people are like, whatever. all this stuff is a shot in the dark. And even just Bob Diaco, just perception as a coach. The guy said weird stuff all the time when he was the defense coordinator at Notre Dame. But guess what? The defense was playing well. So people were like, he's eccentric, whatever. Like, that's Bob Diaco, right? Like, he's a handsome guy. He's got good personality. He's just got a weird personality. That's right. All of a sudden, he goes to UConn. He's getting his butt kicked, and he's making up fake trophies and stuff, and people are clowning him, right? Like, it's just things switch like that in a second. It's just one of those things where it's like, it's so stupid. It's dumb. And we don't even need to go into it further. And, but it's just like one of those things where it's like, I think about that Bob Diaco thing all the time, because it's just one of those things. It's like, if someone showed up, whatever, it's like, just say someone shows up at parents saying someone does anything that's like out of the ordinary, extra. Well, if you love Notre Dame and you really want your kid to go to Notre Dame, and your kid loves Notre Dame, then you're like, wow, look at this, is so great. But if you don't, then that's what the thing. And then, so bottom line, I would guess it's like, Justin Scott didn't want to go to Notre Dame. So that's all you can look at it.
Yeah. But I do think it's fair, though, like, to look at the bigger picture, because the bigger picture matters in this, in my opinion, because it's not Justin Scott, like you said. It's a whole bunch of other guys, right? It's all the guys from the class before, and it's this class now, especially defensively, and we talked about this on the ISD message board too. And I do think there is something to be said about the fact that for separate from his coaching ability, and we're talking about Al Golden here, separate from that, there was an expectation there would be more on the recruiting trail, and it hasn't been there. And it's not just, landed X guy and this guy. Like, I talked to Christian, and he tells me about Chris O'Leary, who's another person who's in the firing line for Notre Dame fans. And I talked to Christian about Chris O'Leary, and he's like, you know what? I talked to recruits, and those guys mention Chris O'Leary all the time. They are constantly talking about him. And so for me, it's just hard to square that with their struggles with numbers, with, quality guys like we've talked about on our show a number of times. It's hard for me to square that. And that's not the case with Al Golden. Like, I don't hear his name. They don't bring up his name. Matt's not writing about that. Christian's not writing about that. So it's a negative. It's a really bad thing with where Notre Dame positions itself in recruiting, where some schools are doing, and NIL is a catch-all, but what we're talking about here is acquisition fees, essentially, inducements. Notre Dame doesn't do inducements. Very famously say they will never do inducements, which I think is a mistake. And we'll talk about that too. But it's like, if that's going to be your position, then that can't be a trump card in recruitments of guys like Justin Scott, of guys like Keon Keeley, of guys like KVA, if he's interested in that, of guys like Caleb Downs, if he's interested in that, Dante Moore, et cetera, et cetera. If that's the case, you can't have a position coach or a coordinator who is just, I don't want to say a zero, but it's like, he's not the reason that players are picking the school. You know what I'm saying? Like Marcus Freeman, he's a reason. When he was the defensive coordinator, guys were picking Notre Dame to play for Marcus Freeman. He was the reason. And Al Golden is not. And he's not even like a second reason or a third reason. Like that, you can't have that. And that is a problem. How do you fix it with he's going into next season? So you have this cycle and you have the 25 cycle that they're already starting on, which, by the way, they're doing a pretty good job with the 25 cycle right now. So there's that context as well. But that's a problem that I don't know how you solve it beyond him just flipping a switch somehow. So how do they do that, Jamie? How do they mitigate that weakness that they have right now?
You got me. They can't do anything about it. That's
it's
just
a problem.
We can't do anything about it. Like you got to play better defense. That helps. So yeah. I think they'll play better defense this year. that'll help. But I mean, it's just one of these things where it's like, I don't even think that Al Gould, like everyone always thinks it's like, it's always somebody's lazy. It's not always about that. That is one of these things that always gets talked about, and it's very rarely the case. Sometimes it is, but it's very rarely is the case where someone's lazy. But it's Al Golden hasn't been in college for years and years, right? He's been out of the game, right? Also has been out of the game as an assistant too. Recruiting as an assistant, much different than recruiting as a head coach. So that kind of role is different than what he's been doing before. So there's obviously a pretty big adjustment to that. Plus I just think like, it's not that Al Golden, it's not like he doesn't sound like an engaging guy when you talk to him or whatever, or he's not like a smart guy or a guy who can like connect with people if you spend enough time with him. But like, there's a reason why like Marcus Freeman will go do an interview show or something. Like he'll do like the pivot or he'll do something like that. And everyone's just like, man, you just want this guy to succeed so much. Like everybody loves him when he can connect with people on so many different levels.
Yeah.
And that's rare. That's really rare. Like you just don't find that with too many people. So when you have somebody like that, who's like a dynamic guy, dynamic personality, who also works super hard at it, and he still obviously is involved in the head coach, but it's not the same as he was when he was, the defensive coordinator, linebackers coach, because it's just impossible to replicate that. So, I mean, really the only way to kind of change it is if they get either they do something where, well, Marcus says, I got to be more involved. But that means he's got to take away something from what else he's doing. And he's got a million other things that he's trying to work out too. So if either he becomes more involved, or I think it's pretty fair to assume that this will be Al Golden's last year at Notre Dame. Like, I think like, I think he wants to go back to the NFL. I think that's pretty obvious, right?
Yeah.
So there's going to be something that happens eventually anyways with that. And whether or not whoever the next defensive coordinator is like a more dynamic recruiter in the mold of Marcus Freeman. But how many guys has Notre Dame had like that? How many guys are there, period, do you hear that are defensive coordinators that are like that? There's not a ton, right? It's just like one of these things where like Brian Hartline is that dude. You know what I mean? Like he can just, he obviously is a great coach, but he connects with these kids, and he's a great recruiter, and he's like at the top of any list you'll see in terms of that kind of thing, connecting and landing these top guys, right? Because you can say, obviously, yeah, they're throwing bags out there like everybody else, I'm sure. But they probably don't have to throw as big a bag as some people because they have Brian Hartline, right? And I would say there's probably a similar thing with Marcus Freeman, but he's not doing that anymore. He's not as involved as he was before, not on the same level, especially with the linebacker recruits. So I think that's part of it. And I don't know. Like it's one of these things where, you definitely don't hear. So, how you said about O'Leary, you don't hear Freeman's name as definitely not as much as when he was a defensive coordinator. And so either that has to change. That could be the only thing that has to change, or it's just like, it's natural and you have to find another coordinator who can at least be close to that, what you had before.
So I'm going to get to a couple comments here. There's a bunch of questions in the chat, and I'm going to get to them. But there are a couple who I'm going to get to this one first, actually, from David Lowe. I have a question for you guys. If the class finishes 15 or worse, how many years does it set the program back, especially defensively? I think possibly none, because You can mitigate now in the portal era. You can mitigate some misses. If it's 1 year, you can mitigate some misses with the portal. You can do that. And I think the last 2 years classes can really make up for a lot, right? The 22 and 23 classes had 14 top 300 players on just defense. And that doesn't include Ben Morrison either. So it's like those classes give them a lot of leeway here. There's a ton of talent, especially at linebacker, where we're upset about KVA and that sort of thing. We'll have to see on Bradley Shaw, but like they have a lot of talent there. They have a lot of talent at corner. Okay, they don't have a lot of talent at safety. We've talked about that. We like what they brought in defensive line wise. Okay, so and they've got some good defensive line guys in this class as well. So it's not like they don't. Like Logan Thomas and Bryce Young, they could be like legit prospects. I think that if you landed Justin Scott and you didn't land like Bryce Young or Logan Thomas, like we wouldn't have the same discussion because of their star rating, but we kind of should, like, because they're very important players. Okay, so there's that piece of it. So I don't think it sets it back that much. And so that's why I think people on the big picture point of view, it's not a freak out. And the fact that I asked Matt today, like, it seems to me that they're doing really well with the 25 class right now. And he agreed with that. So it doesn't seem like this is carrying over to the next 20. I'm kind of curious about why that is, and we'll have to get into that on another show. But that's my opinion on that. Do you have an opinion on this, Jamie?
Well, sometimes it's just like it's different, but for years in terms of like what kids connect better with Notre Dame, right? There's more elite kids who connect better with Notre Dame in a given year, right? There's one thing to kind of look at when you look at just the class overall is this is a very weak year at offensive line. So when it's a weaker year at offensive line, obviously Notre Dame's done pretty well on the offensive line so far, but still, it's not like they have Kramer and Eichenberg in this, in terms of recruits at that level, right? Like, because there aren't Kramer and Eichenberg like at that level this year, really, right? Like, they're just not. So it was, so even the year where they landed, Spindler and Fisher, well, that year was like loaded with really, really top guys who considered Notre Dame. And then Notre Dame didn't land them all, but they still landed Fisher and Spindler. So that boosts everything up. Like, there's all these kind of other factors that kind of go into it. So that's part of it for sure. And some of it might be just that it was the first year of the new staff and they were like worried about like finishing that first class, and maybe they didn't handle like all of the kind of minutia of like guys who could flip and finishing out and closing out the class, because there obviously was like a lot of turnover with the class near the end, right? And I think that's something that, like, they're dealing with the first time as a staff. So it's like, well, if you're more concentrating on that than you are the next class, that hurts the next class, right? So it's like, or also too, maybe they didn't have a good enough, maybe they go back and they look at, we didn't have a good enough initial plan with 2024. And that's why it's hurting us now, but we have a better plan for 2025. And that's why we're doing better now. It might just be as simple as that. Right. Yeah. So, I don't know. Like, I would say, like, okay. I mean, Xander, you don't have to be so negative about everything. Like, I do agree that who cares about hyping up 2025? Like, they have some good commits right now, a couple guys, but it's like, it's just way too early to even get into that. Like, just wait to see what happens. So it's like, all of a sudden, if they land Deuce Knight, and then it's like, okay, well then now they're off to a really great start, and then all of these kind of things. But if they don't, then it's like, okay, well, that's going to be a disaster. Where do they go from there at quarterback? There's all these kind of little things that can happen. But it is insane to me that anyone would think that, like, you have the 15th ranked class and that's disastrous. Like, let's be real here. Like, that is dumb. That's not a good take. It's not a disaster having the fifth ring. It's not a good thing to take a step back and whatever. Of course you'd rather have a top 5 class, but all it means that. So if you look at it means that all these plan B guys that they've taken on defense who weren't their initial guys, right? It's like, well, are these guys going to hit? Are these guys going to rise up the rankings because they, a lot of these guys didn't play Tabron Benny Powell didn't play safety for, and then all of a sudden he'd play safety and he's going to take a big thing. Rezak, whatever. Some of these other guys, are they going to take a big jump? Or are you going to look at, so you mentioned Young and Thomas. Well, if 3 years from now, those two guys are like the stars of the class and they're going to be like NFL players, it's like, well, then, I mean, that changes the whole dynamic of how you view the class. Like the 2016 class was one of the worst classes that Brian Kelly signed on paper. It had one of the lowest overall average rankings. I think it was like 89.0 right on the dot. It was the lowest, one of the lowest ones, might have been the lowest one, actually. They only signed 10 4 stars, 13 3 stars. It's the best class of the Brian Kelly era.
And they were the core of 2 playoff runs.
Yes. But it was one of these things where they had the perfect mix of everything. They had some 3 stars hit big, right? Like guys like Julian Love and Jameer Jones, who, I mean, I wouldn't say he hit big, but he ended up being a good player. Ade Ogundeji hit big, right? And then you have some of your top guys, Eichenberg and Kramer. Those guys are multi-year starters. You have Jalen Elliott was not an NFL guy, but he was a multi-year starter, good player. Ian Book looks like a horrible take at the time. People would be complaining left and right about having to settle for Ian Book at the time. And people might not like that Ian Book wasn't a top pick, but I mean, where would they have been without Ian Book, right? He was a very good quarterback for Notre Dame overall. And then they had the 3 defensive ends that were like the highly ranked guys who hit big. And the guy who was ranked the lowest out of them was Julian Okwara. He was the best of them all. Dalen Hayes was like the prize. I mean, it took him till like year 4 or 5 before he really took off, right? So, and Kareem easily, that's like one of those things where people were like, well, they got him from Alabama, but did Alabama drop him? What's the deal? Guy ended up being a phenomenal player for Notre Dame, right? It's just one of these things. It's like, well, how's it going to hit later on? Did you win with your evaluations? Did you win with the development? And that's ultimately what's going to matter. So it's like, you can have the 15th class. This class could end up being better than the previous 2 classes. It could, and I would be surprised if it did, but it could, right? And it's just one of these things. And then the other thing is that you got to remember, it's all part of it. Like you said, Greg, where well, they have the 2 classes before, and then how they follow it up after, because it isn't even really about the immediate. It's about where they're at, a few years down the road when they get to, when it's 2026. And then it's like, okay, well, now these guys that you signed in this class, you have to get some players they have to be players. Right. And if they're not, then you're going to be in trouble, right? You're going to be in trouble, especially if you didn't have the class after it that kind of could make up for it. Cause sometimes that happens too. Right. So it's one of these things. It's it's not about the 1 year. It's about really the back-to-back classes. And this is something that Mike Frank has done for a long time. He's looked at the classes back-to-back and kind of looking at the 2-year hauls. I think it's a smart way to do it, because if you're kind of looking at it, that's the way you look, because if you miss 2 years in a row at a position, let's just say 2 years in a row, they have weaker linebacker recruiting, right? And it's well, then that ends up costing you, because then someone has to play earlier than expected, or you have to got to take a transfer to fill in, and you got to do all this. And that's where you get burned. And that's kind of where they're that's kind of what the defense has been this last couple of years, right? Where they've
Mm-hmm.
missed at some spots and they didn't really recruit well in those last two, the 2021 and 2020 specifically. Like, those were not good recruiting classes on defense for Notre Dame. And that's kind of why the defense is like hitting their head against the ceiling. They can only be so good because they don't have enough studs in those classes from those classes.
And I do think that we do need to talk about the kind of the admin portion of this, because, Xander brought up a point that I hear a lot, that, James Laurentis, who's a GA, is kicking their butt, right? Well, why do you think that is? Because it's not just that he's beating out Al Golden, he's beating out Freeman as well. So why is that? What does James Laurentis have at Ohio State that he didn't have at Notre Dame? Right? They have, and look, there have been a number of Ohio State accounts talking about this. Like, they have a legit, robust NIL program for recruiting. Notre Dame has a NIL program for players currently on the roster. That is true. And I don't want to conflate the two things, okay, because it's different, right? But they don't for recruiting. They will not pay inducements. And first of all, you shouldn't box yourself in like that, because when you eventually get there, and I think Notre Dame will, you look like a hypocrite. It's just like the thing with Live Golf in the PGA Tour. PGA Tour said we're never gonna associate with them. We're never gonna associate with them. We're never gonna associate with them. And then it got to the point where, hey, they're killing us with these lawsuits. We're not going to survive anymore. We have to. And then they partnered up with them, and so now they're going to take their money. It's like you don't want to box yourself into a situation. You shouldn't say we're not going to do that, because eventually they are going to do that. We know they are, Jamie. Whether it's 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 4 years from now, that's just they're going to have to, and they will do it reluctantly. They should just do it now. But they also need to take seriously, like, is Notre Dame going to be a legit elite program, or are they going to just try to do just enough to stick with the times? Because they're always trying to just stick with the times, and these other schools are they're continuing to think, how do we get better? 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 Those top teams are always doing that. And I'm sorry, like, if Notre Dame was competing with Ohio State and Alabama and Georgia with their NIL programs for high school players, I don't know that we're having this conversation. I don't know that they are. And it's been brought up other places. I heard Irish Illustrated bring this up as well. If you're willing to pay Sam Hartman to come, then why aren't you willing to pay Justin Scott, for example, or Keon Keeley, or Dante Moore? What's the difference? That's what college football is right now. And it's like you're asking Marcus Freeman, and look, he needs to be held accountable for his hires. He needs to be held accountable for how he coaches, the people he brings in, right? Like, I think he bears responsibility for Al Golden, right? That's your guy. You brought him in. He can't be a negative recruiter. It's his job, right? That Marcus Freeman said, you can't be a negative recruiter on our staff. And he is. So, like, he bears responsibility for that. At the same time, like, the administration needs to step up and just say, hey, we are going to even the playing field for you. How about this? How about we build an NIL program that's better than Ohio State? How about that? Like, that's also in play. You could do that. They could. They don't want to. They've never wanted to. And it's a problem. It's a problem. And so I just feel like that hovers over all of this. It's like, I don't like the term, like, Notre Dame has their two hands tied behind their back. I don't like that, because it's just, I don't know the degree that that's true. But the fact of the matter is, they are recruiting against situations where, if it's like, If it's 50-50 and I'm not sure, like KVA, and I don't know that this is the case. I don't know that Ohio State's dropping the bag. But if it's 50-50 and one school's offering you money and another school is not, I mean, that's just the world. It has nothing to do with with greed or any of that stuff. It's just the world. They will pay me to do this and this school won't. And so therefore I'm going to go there. Notre Dame needs to realize that. They need to make a decision. Like, are we going to go in on this or are we not? That's kind of how I feel about that. I guess that was kind of a rant. I don't know. I didn't mean to, but what do you think, Jamie?
I mean, it's pretty obvious. They, that's always how Notre Dame is, whatever. I don't need to get into it further. Like, Notre Dame is always reactive when it comes to anything. That's just how they always been. They don't want to, they're never going to be a leader in any of those kind of spaces. Right. And I mean, the other thing is that it's like, it's not just, it morphs into something more, and it is whatever. It is definitely like out of control with some of the stuff that, like, we don't need to get into, but like some of the stuff is way out of control with definitely a lot of guys. When you hear somebody comes to the campus and they're like, oh, they're not a fit, it's because that guy and whatever his family or whatever is asking, that's out of control. Like, right. That's, and those are guys that aren't going to make it probably most places anyway, right? Like, they're probably not going to make it wherever they go. So I don't think it's about that. But yeah, I do think there's, like, you just got to be competitive within the space, right? You got to be competitive within the space with just everything. And that's just how it is, right? And
it's not just NIL. It's like a whole bunch of stuff.
Everything, it's right? Well, I mentioned it 6 thoughts today too, right? Like, it's just the thing with the dorms, right? The dorms, like, that's just getting in the way. Oh, that's tradition. Things changed. They used to not allow women to enroll at Notre Dame. Like, it's just, things change, and treat the football players different because they are different, so, like, and they get treated different at everywhere else. And it's not to say that, like, you don't have to treat them different in terms of what they do in terms of earning a degree. No one would ever say that. You still got to work and earn your degree. But in terms of, like, coming to campus and just having the option of that all these other schools have, in terms of, like, having no roommate, or even if they say you have to live on campus, but having no roommate, and these other schools do offer it. Like, it's just these little things that are just, like, it's hard enough to decide to go to school in South Bend over like Athens. Like, I'm just, here's a hot tip. Athens is a way cooler place than South Bend. Yeah. But, like, they're just, there's a lot of, there's obstacles that don't need to be there. It's hard enough to be an actual student athlete at Notre Dame compared to a lot of other places. You don't need to have those obstacles that are unnecessary, that are totally unnecessary. But I just wanted to bring up one thing too. And I mean, whatever, there's going to be different people that come into the show. Maybe there's new people. People need to stop talking about, like, oh man, what did we hire Marcus Freeman? He's not recruiting as well as or Brian Kelly did better, or, like, he's not as good as Brian Kelly. Get out of here. Like, do these people not follow recruiting? Like, it's not even close. It's actually not even close. Here's Marcus Freeman. So this is the class isn't over yet, by the way, but it's like, the last 2.5 classes, there's 50 blue chips, right? So 4 or 5-star prospects in the last 2.5 cycles for Freeman, basically. The previous 3 classes, Notre Dame signed 40. So 10 more over that 3 years. So 10, that's basically 10 more on your roster.
Right.
That's pretty good. I think that's what you want. The average rating. So in taking this year, which is, like, a down year compared to the other years, the average rating in the Freeman class is 91.41, right? The average rating in Kelly's best 3-year run, which is 2012, 2014, which included that top 5, 2013 class, 90.94. So this run right now is better than the best run of Brian Kelly. It's definitely upgraded over what was going on the last 3 years. And, you had all those playoff appearances you were recruiting off of during that time. So it's not close. It isn't close. And the thing is if you're talking about, oh, things are trending down or whatever, this is where things are going to go. Well, you have to see, how it'll go. Right. But if it's just 1 year, are we not counting the other stuff? It's just
that's also why I brought up 25, because it's important, right? Like if they're trending, like if they're doing well in the 25 class, if this year becomes an aberration, then it's not that big a deal. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, that's why I brought it up. And so you look back at if 24 is going to be the down year when they're, they have they're great, they finish 10th or they finish 12th or whatever. If that's the down year, then okay, that's okay. That's why I bring up 25. Anyway, go ahead.
Well, and okay, so this is also too, and this is why I'll give credit to Ohio State, and because I know that they weren't as competitive in NIL as some of these other programs, and they lost. They didn't have a really great class in the 2023 class. I know they finished 4th, but for them, that was a bad class.
Yeah.
Right. They only signed one guy who was a 5-star. Right. For them, that's a bad class. Right. Yeah. They signed how many top 100 guys, but not that many top 50 guys, not as many as they definitely normally they've had classes before where they signed 10 top 50 guys. So this year they have 4 4-stars already committed, 5 in the top 50 just right now. Right. So they already have a better class than they had last year. And a lot of it is because they're okay, this is how you adjust to it. And the other thing is you got to adjust on the fly.
Right.
And do it within this class. You can't just wait till the next class. So that part of it also has to be figured into the equation as well, right? So, and it doesn't get taken into the equation enough because everybody's in the moment and they only think about this just happened, so this is whatever. It's just it happens during the season when they lose a game that they shouldn't, and then or just lose a game period, and it's oh man, the sky is falling. Well, it isn't really about that. It's what you do the next week and whatever. And it's just if it snowballed, if 3-3 snowballs, and then let's say the reverse happened and they got their butt kicked by Clemson. Well, that would have been very bad, right? That would have been very bad. And then, I can't even imagine what the heat would have been like on Marcus Freeman after that. But it's the whole point is, he flipped the narrative with that game. And even losing to USC after, it still wasn't, the same, right? So I do think it's part of recruiting is, doing well and getting and landing all these guys. But a huge chunk of it is well, you lost out on this guy. Well, who's the next guy? And it's just, and whatever. And even if you just want to kind of transition that to Isaiah Canion, Isaiah Canion is a nice prospect. He's a very good athlete. Lot of good stuff to work with as a deep threat. He's a very elite athlete. At the same time, he's not irreplaceable. That's a guy that I think it's probably ridiculous with the suggestion that they were oh, well, they can get Jeremiah McClellan now. It's well, this guy never visited, so I don't think he's coming. It's just, that was just one of the dumbest things. I just don't understand when that kind of thing gets thrown out. It's yeah, of course. Oh, they're gonna talk to and see. It's I don't think he showed that much interest. I don't think ND is in the back of his mind. You know what I mean? So let alone the forefront of his mind. So, but they can find another Isaiah Canion in this class.
I mean, Isaiah Canion was a sleeper.
Yes.
They can find another sleeper.
A guy who, when he committed, a lot of people ripped, right? It's just, it's one of these things. It's like, all that matters is what happens next. Right. Yeah. And that's a thing. And that ultimately is like where does, taking it back to where does recruiting go from here? It's like, well, it's all based on the kind of the response of what happens. Right. And it's just like, and if it's like, first of all, I don't think it is all about NIL, right? In terms of like them losing out on some of these guys. But if you do lose out someone, it just like, it's like, how it always happens is like the people who really can affect change, they take notice not when you lose Isaiah Canion as a decommit. They take notice when you lose Justin Scott, when you don't land Dante Moore, Keon Keeley, etc. Right? That's when they take notice, and that's the thing that has to kind of spark change. But that is also the same thing where it's like where James Franklin talking about, well, we lost that recruit and he ended up being a good player. It's like, I guarantee that was like ended up being like his main argument to get like that changed at Penn State in terms of like the dorms. Right. So it's like, well, that's part of the deal. It's like, you have to make a case for why this was like cost you. And if that's the case, then that's what sparks change.
And that's why I always talk about, like, when I say a serious team, like, that's what I'm saying. Like, look at Ohio State. They identified a problem last year. What happened to them was very similar to what happened to Notre Dame last year with the top guys that they lost. And they said, no, like, never again. That's not going to happen again. And they took care of it. And Notre Dame did not take care of it, not say never again. They just, and look what happened, And so, like, I just look at Ohio State, right? And it's the same kind of conversation with the Goog. Like, to me, the Goog in this conversation, like, they don't really belong. But in terms of like when you're taking your program seriously, like Ohio State and Notre Dame, they both brought in new football facilities in 2005, right? Ohio State renovated theirs in 2019. And here we are talking about Notre Dame. And to whatever extent it's an issue, it's there to be talked about. The Ohio State fans are not talking about their Goog, whatever their version is, because they already revamped it. They solve problems before it becomes a problem. The NIL thing, like,
I don't know that for a fact with Ohio State, because I definitely, like, I'm not like on other teams' message boards, but I mean, I do think there's things because people complain about stuff at Notre Dame and people think, oh, it's only Notre Dame who's going through this. It's like, no, this is like these complaints happen everywhere where there's something, right? There's something. It might be NIL, might be whatever.
It's not that there's not complaints though. It's that they're like, people are always going to complain. Like Bama fans, they want Nick Saban.
It's like champagne problems, I guess.
Yeah, like it's different. It's different problems. It's like a different level of problems. Like, I'm just saying, like, Notre Dame, they have the same problem. We'll go back to NIL. They have the same problem they had last year, and Ohio State doesn't, because they fixed it. Fix it.
Yeah.
Everyone just fix it. We talk about coaches, Al Golden, Al Washington, Chris O'Leary. It's been this way. First it was Dell and Autry Denson and Todd Light, and Quinn, Jeff Quinn. Like, all the coaches, when you get rid of these coaches, like, we're asking Notre Dame to fire coaches every single year because they're not good recruiters. And it's like, why doesn't Notre Dame, like, hey, maybe we need to, like, I don't like Jack Swarbrick's out, so it doesn't matter. But, like, don't tell me you don't have an institutional problem. You do. It's been 35 years.
Yeah.
It's been 35 years. You have an institutional problem. Everyone fix it.
Also, I just want to also bring up how last year Mike Mickens was a guy that people were bringing up all the time.
True. And now no one brings.
And now people are like, well, they got to change. I literally read something where people were like, well, they got to get rid of the whole defensive side, except for Mike Mickens.
Mickens. It's just funny because his corners are. It's not like he's brought in like these 5-star corners either.
He's landed good corners, but it's the kind of thing. It's just, it matters that they have gone and played well, right? And that's what it is. And which is also one of these things that's so stupid about Al Washington is like, I mean, whatever. I don't want to be critical of the guys that were on the team, but like, he didn't get handed Aquara and Hayes and Kareem and Tillery, right? He didn't get handed that when he walked in. And you can say Isaiah Foskey, obviously he's a good player, but who else was an NFL player? On that. They didn't have it. Right. So it's just like how too, like Clark Lee, and he's whatever, fantastic coordinator for Notre Dame, and no doubt about it. But he walked into the best situation possible. They were number one in returning production on defense that year. And they had stud after stud at so like people were like, man, Mike Elko didn't really do a good job with the safeties. It's like, well, the next year looked a lot better at safety, probably because Alohi Gilman was eligible. That's part of it, right? So it's all these kind of things, and I don't know. Like I just think it's ridiculous, and I also just think it's ridiculous. Period. Like, I know everybody's a fan or whatever, and a lot of face it, there's a lot of people who do like podcasts that are like crazy fanboys that they just like whatever, that they're just like angry people yelling at the screens, like, because that's their thing. I don't get why people would say, calling for people's jobs. Like, I just like, it's ridiculous to me. Or like even just the fact that like with ESPN and they've had to lay off all these people just separately. Why celebrate? Even if you don't like the person, like, do you really need to celebrate that somebody got fired? It's like, like, have you ever lost a job before? Have you been laid off at a place and it wasn't even your fault or whatever, but it just, something happened? Like, it's just whatever. Like, I don't get it. Even if you don't like the person and whatever, just don't celebrate somebody's failure. I'm not down with that.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to the show. We're going to have to figure out something because my family's on vacation next week. So, but if I can, anytime we go on vacation, I check the Wi-Fi, and if it's good enough, we'll do a show, and if it's not, then we won't. So we'll figure that out. We'll have something planned for you guys. If not, I'll be back the week after that. So thank you, everyone, for tuning in. If you like what you hear, hit the like button, hit subscribe button. I didn't do this at the beginning of the show, and that's a real bummer, but we'll do it now. Links to the podcast are in the description below, so you can check out the audio form there. Have a good, everyone. We'll talk to you next week. Have a good weekend.